and breadth of Crete. What these sites have in common is their destruction in a series of terrible disasters in the middle of the 2nd millennium BC. According to the Greek philosopher Plato, Atlantis was destroyed in a single day and night, the land swallowed up by the sea. 100 miles north of Crete, on Santorini, Floyd McCoy has been gathering data to determine whether the eruption that occurred here in 1500 BC was sufficient to cause the devastation of Crete. His results are encouraging.
So how big was this eruption? It was huge. How do we determine this is by how much material is blown out during the eruption. And the more we look, the more we find. There are huge, thick deposits of this ash and pumice on the seafloor that surround this island. It's been found down to the Nile Delta. It's been found up in the Black Sea. When we take all of this material and calculate the volume of it, we come out with an eruption that is perhaps times Krakatoa in 1883.
Because Krakatoa exploded in the late 19th century, we have comprehensive records, and the details are chilling. The eruption ejected more than 6 cubic miles of rock, ash, and pumice into the atmosphere, killing over 36,000 people. But this was nothing compared to the Santorini eruption.
It was enormous, and it occurred right in the middle of a flourishing civilization. Now things got nasty. In this eruption, things got terribly violent, and the mixture of water with this magma produced what we call pyroclastic surges and flows. As they swept across the landscape, they destroyed everything that had not been buried in this pumice.
At the heart of this civilization in Akrotiri, archaeologists have found signs that residents were but escape was no guarantee of survival. The settlements of Crete were also devastated, not by the ash and pumice that was raining down on Santorini, but by the next, even more devastating phase of the eruption.
Every pyroclastic flow that entered the ocean also pushed the ocean aside. When you push the ocean aside, tsunami.
Our investigators have turned to the experts at the National Observatory in Athens for evidence. Using the very latest investigative techniques, they have discovered proof of a killer tsunami.
Because of this new field of science, we have been able to discover a number of about 10 distinct tsunami events. So there's no doubt today that this very big tsunami event really existed and possibly contributed to the collapse of the Minoan civilization.
Dozens of tsunamis swept across the entire Aegean. They made their way into the Mediterranean.
These massive waves surged towards the unprotected north coast of Crete. First in the firing line was the coastal town of Malia. Just yards from the seashore stood a magnificent palace, its sophisticated structures built with the same complex layout as the palace at Knossos. The 3-story facade facing north was in the direct path of the approaching waves.
The inhabitants of the region probably gathered here at the palace because they saw this great plume of ash shooting up into the sky off to the north. It would have been visible all the way down to the Nile Delta.
When the ash cloud reached the island, the sky above this Minoan palace turned grey. During excavations on Crete, Alexander McGillivray discovered volcanic ash in the deepest parts of the palace ruins. It's a clue as to the catastrophic sequence of events that overtook this society.
When the first wave came pushing ashore, bringing with it their fleet. From fishing boats to great trading ships would have all come crashing through here and gone all the way to the foot of the mountains over there, ripping away at this architecture, rubble and trees and smashed up ships come crashing back through here and over back into the sea.
This scene of destruction was repeated all along the coast of Crete and far beyond. Not even the brilliant builders of the great reinforced walls of Knossos could have foreseen the power of the tremors that accompanied these waves. For the survivors of the largest volcanic eruption in history, life in the Mediterranean became hell on earth. Thousands were dead. Tsunamis had poisoned the land with salt water, and the air was thick with ash and noxious gases. Just as Plato wrote when he described the end of Atlantis, the island of Santorini at the center of this newly discovered world had been destroyed. It had been blown to smithereens, then swallowed by the sea. And 100 miles away, the great palaces of Crete had been devastated by quakes and engulfed by terrible tidal waves. In their search for evidence of the survivors of this devastating cataclysm, our investigators are piecing together the final chapter in the life of this extraordinary civilization.
When the tsunami swept through here and reduced this building behind me to foundation level, the best way for the survivors to cope was to go to the most powerful nation and the wealthiest nation of the time to ask for help.
Alexander McGillivray believes that the survivors turned to their long-term trading partners, the Egyptians.
There may have been people brought in from elsewhere to help with all of this, with the pharaoh in Egypt contributing the wealth and perhaps the manpower.
This close relationship with Egypt may be the single most important link that researchers have established between this newly discovered civilization and stories of Atlantis. Because the origin of the so-called myth of Atlantis was not Greek, but Egyptian. In 590 BC, in the holiest shrine of Egypt's capital, the Greek statesman Solon was shown ancient inscriptions almost 1,000 years old, dating back to 1450 BC. They reveal the existence of a civilization of great power and prestige to the west of Egypt. When Solon returned to his homeland, the story of Atlantis became part of Greek folklore, a tale told at parties and passed down through the generations until in 370 BC, Plato penned his version of this Egyptian tale. Now, on the wall of an Egyptian tomb, researchers have discovered inscriptions that they believe are the original texts shown to Solon. It seems that he must have invented the name Atlantis, since the Egyptians called the people of this ancient world by another name. That name was Keftiu, and Keftiu is the Egyptian name for the people of Crete, the island believed to be at the heart of this lost world. So what happened to the survivors from this remarkable civilization? There are signs on Crete that the Keftiu did begin to recover after the catastrophic volcano. But the survivors were dangerously vulnerable, and soon after the catastrophe, warriors from the Greek mainland invaded Crete. The Minoans did not have the strength or the numbers to repel the invaders, and the island fell. This spelt the final end to one of mankind's great early civilizations. The sophisticated engineering techniques and the extraordinary architecture that gave this people its unique identity disappeared forever. The Greeks went on to dominate the entire Western world. And it is their culture on which our Western societies are based. But things could have been